Welcome to Metro. This is a service to Flinders Street, stopping all stations direct to Flinders Street.
Hello everybody, my name is Martin and I run a YouTube channel you may have heard of called Taitset. Here we are at 40,000 subscribers, which is double the number that I had exactly this time last year. First of all, thank you very much to everybody who sent questions in. I will not be able to get through all of them because there are a lot. Last year I spent about 90 minutes answering the questions, and there are significantly more questions this time. So nothing personal if I don't get to your question. I had a little bit of a random selection process. So I tried to make sure there were some diverse questions in there, but hopefully it should give us some interesting things to chat about. So 40,000 subscribers. If all 40,000 of you lay down head to toe, starting from Spencer Street, you would reach just about to North Geelong Station, going via Werribee. And I should say that, you know, YouTube in general puts a lot of emphasis on subscriber numbers because it's the most visible part of channels, but actually the majority of people watching YouTube videos aren't subscribed by a very large margin. So more than 40,000 people watch my videos every single week, and that's quite astounding to me. It's certainly reached a much bigger audience than I really ever expected. Although my sort of idea from pretty early on was that I wanted to reach a more general audience rather than just people who were already interested in this stuff, and I think it's pretty clear that it has reached that much wider audience, which is very exciting, and it's been great to see a lot of very positive feedback of people who have discovered more about the system they use every day, or the system in the city they live in, and that's been a big part of what this has been about, is helping people appreciate that the world of public transport around them. Alright, so first question I'm going to bring up is this one because I quite liked the first part of this question, which is, how have you been doing? Have you been working, channel related or otherwise, on anything interesting recently? I've been doing very well, thank you. And yeah, I have been working on some interesting stuff over the last year, generally speaking. I will answer that in a little bit more detail shortly, as it's going to relate to some other questions that are going to come up. But this year has seen some pretty big changes for me compared to what I said I was doing last year, and all very much positive changes. So let's move on to some other questions that will help prompt me into telling you about that. So I've got two questions here, which are sort of going to have a related answer. One of them is, what is my job and why am I not a driver? Very good question. I did answer that last year, but it may have a slightly different answer this time. And the other one is, do I earn money from content creation apart from Patreon? So this time last year, I said this about what I was doing for a job.
No, I don't work within the transport industry. I actually work in another industry that's quite relevant to producing videos, and that is the photography industry. In a pretty fortunate position that I have a permanent job in the photography industry, which is very rare.
Since then, it was actually only about a month after I said that I decided to quit that job for various reasons. But it was around that time that I decided that this YouTube channel is pretty important to me, and obviously a lot of people really enjoy watching it. And to answer that second question, yes, I do make money from it. So basically, for those who don't know, there's a thing called the YouTube Partner Program where channels above a certain size meeting various requirements can make money from advertising. Basically, you get a cut of all those annoying ads that interrupt your videos. It's not very much per view. It's a very small amount, but when you get the sort of large viewing numbers that some of my videos do, it does start to add up. And I took a bit of a risk at the start of this year and decided not to get a new job for basically as long as I could. I'm not a career-focused person. I have never had a full-time job. I have, for brief periods of time, worked full-time hours in casual positions, but I've never actually had a full-time job. Due to various personal characteristics, I'm going to say I'm not well suited to working full-time. I can't really cope with it. And that's one of the reasons why I don't work in the transport industry, particularly because a lot of jobs in the transport industry involve shift work and that sort of thing. But also, as I have mentioned previously, I have two young kids, and a big part of my life priority at the moment is just spending time with them. So this year I decided I was going to focus more on being a parent and continuing with some intermittent freelance contract photography work that I do, but primarily making these YouTube videos has now become my income. So I don't want people thinking that you can make a full-time income off a channel this size. You can't, essentially, but given that I was only a part-time employee before this, the income I've been able to earn from the channel has been close to covering what I have lost from quitting my job last year. And my partner has also been working a bit more this year to help balance that out. So the actual income from the advertising from YouTube is incredibly unpredictable. It surges and disappears depending on how frequently I upload videos, but also other things that are happening that I don't know about behind the scenes with the advertising market and things like that. Also depends which country the viewers are in, what ads they're looking at, all sorts of things. So it's not a stable income, and that's one of the big reasons why I created the Patreon, because it creates a much more predictable base level amount of money to keep that funding going. And it's really the funds that I raise from Patreon that have made it sustainable for me not to get another job at this stage. So for those of you who have signed up to Patreon, I really can't thank you enough, because it has allowed me to spend a lot more time this year putting dedicated time into these videos, which I just wouldn't have had. So when you look at the videos I've made over the last year or so, most of them would have not been possible to the same extent if I had still been working. So really what the funds from this channel do is they buy me the time to work on the videos, which previously when I had my job, I was really struggling to find time to make these videos. I had to do a lot of it after work or very early in the morning or at other strange times, and it really wasn't very healthy. Whereas I've been able to be a fair bit more relaxed about it this year. I'm not going to say completely relaxed, but I've had the time to spend working on the videos, and if there's something specific I've needed to go and get a shot of something on the other side of the city, or go and look at something in person to see what it's like, whatever, I've had the time to be able to do that. So yeah, a bit of a roundabout answer to those questions, but basically I'm a stay-at-home dad, I'm a part-time YouTuber, and I do still do some photography work as well. So the next couple of questions I want to answer are about the long line videos that I have done. So far it's been the Hurstbridge line and the Upfield line videos. I do get very frequent questions about when the next one will come, and I can tell you that the next one is nearly finished. I've been out shooting for it this morning. It's very close to being having the voiceover recorded, and it's approaching the final stages of being put together, basically. So when people ask, when will I next make one of these videos, the real answer is that I'm always making them. So the Hurstbridge line video took me 7 months, the Upfield line video took me 10 months, and the one I'm working on now I think it's been about 7 months already, and it's not finished yet. So really there's been no point in the last 2 years or so where I haven't been working on one of these videos, and they just take a very long time to put together. And it's kind of an example of how, as much as this channel does provide me with an income, I am still more interested in creating interesting content, because it doesn't make economical sense to make videos that take this much effort. So basically, I would hate to try and work out dollars per hour worked on these kind of projects, but if all I wanted to do was make money, I would go and get a job. So it's really, I'm in this to make interesting content, and I really enjoy doing these long line videos, and I know they've been some of the most popular ones that I've made, which, as I've said before, was a huge surprise to me. When I first did the Hurstbridge line video, I didn't think people would be interested in watching a 40-minute video. That sort of came at around the time that I think long-form videos were really starting to take off culturally on YouTube, and if there's one bit of feedback I had on the Upfield line video is that it could have been even longer. And I can tell you that the one I'm working on now is going to be even longer, probably by a fair margin. You've probably noticed I'm not saying what the one I've almost finished is, and that's because I like to keep these ones a secret until I publish them, but my members on Patreon do know what it is, because I do talk about it in my updates there. And I do have a question here from one of my members on Patreon, Jackery, who has asked, after the redacted line, what will I work on next? And it's a very good question. I'm sort of thinking, this isn't set in stone, but I think I'll probably do one line from each group first, so try and spread it out a bit. I get a lot of requests for Belgrave, Lilydale. I get a lot of requests for Frankston. I get a lot of requests for Pakenham. It'll probably be one of those next, I suspect. And spoiler alert, the one I've almost finished right now is none of those 3. All right, do I have any other interests or hobbies beside trains? Yeah, I've sort of mentioned it before, but I'm very into camping and bushwalking. I really like getting out into nature and spending time in remote places. I'm very passionate about nature conservation, and I try and go camping with my family multiple times per year in Victoria's national parks usually, which is something I did with my own family when I was a kid as well. So yeah, as a kid we always went camping, usually every school holidays, so we're talking at least 4 times a year, and often for at least a week or more each. And you know, sort of trying to do that with my own kids now, and so we do spend a lot of time out camping, and yeah, it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I think it's really important. All right, how do I keep track of my video ideas, and do I ever worry about running out of things to talk about? I certainly do. So I keep track of my video ideas in this important document, ideas.txt, and it's very, very long, and in reality I very rarely actually consult it. Usually I've got something in mind of what's going to come up next, but I do try and, every time I have an idea, I try and add it in there so that I can go and refer to that if I am ever struggling for ideas. But look, it does occur to me every now and then that as I make more and more videos and cover more of the obvious topics, it might get harder and harder to find new things to make videos about, but it hasn't really been the case so far. I think things always pop up, and often surprising things that maybe I didn't expect. You know, especially things like the Metro Tunnel videos. I didn't know I was going to be making those until I was asked to go down there, and you know, there's always going to be something, I think. And if I run out of things to do in Melbourne, I'll just have to do some more interstate things. Do I have a plan on uploading to other social media platforms? Not really. It might happen at some point, but really I sort of use all of the time I have available to me at the moment working on YouTube, and I can't really imagine how I would find time and effort to manage another platform. Certainly wouldn't rule it out, but it's not something on my list to do at the moment. I'm just going to answer one of these questions here. Do I plan to make my map scan or train consist images public? That would be very useful. A lot of people have asked me this, and it's kind of a difficult question to answer. First of all, my scan of the 1949 Victorian Railways map I do have available for my Patreon members. I've made a sort of downloadable version of that. For all the diagrams and things that I make myself, and that includes those the train consist images, things like that, I don't want to make them public because they are the raw materials that I make my videos from. And I think one of the things that has made this channel successful is that I do things a bit differently to other people, and if I put all of those resources out there and other people could make videos that essentially look the same as mine, then it would kind of take that uniqueness out of it. And you know, I'd prefer to see other people doing things in their own style, and like particularly the diagrams, but also those little train graphics I made, they take quite a lot of effort as well, so it is something that I sort of place a fair bit of value on. Has anyone recognised my voice in person and clicked that I was the Melbourne Trains guy? Yes, this happens surprisingly often, maybe 5 or 6 times, which yeah, is quite surprising to me. But then I guess some people have certainly listened to tens of hours of my voice, so maybe it shouldn't be surprising. But something that's happened as the channel's got larger is that more and more I've had people know who I am or be familiar with the videos in sort of completely out of context situations, you know, at my kids' school, or you know, just random places that are not actually railway related. Are there any videos I'd like to remake or update? There sort of are, but I think it's a trap I don't want to fall into, of going back and remaking videos, because I think once you start looking at that as an option, it would be so easy to go back and get really fixated on fixing old videos. And whenever I go back and watch my older videos, I always spot things that I would do differently now, and I think it's a dangerous road to go down, because if I started doing that, I'd never make any new videos. The one video I might consider remaking is the City Loop video, because partly because I think that there's a lot of stuff in that I would do differently now, but also when the Metro Tunnel opens next year, a lot of it's going to be wrong. It's a lot of those operations are going to be different. So I might consider remaking that video when the Metro Tunnel opens, and I'd probably include maybe some other stuff in it to make it a bit more of an extended video as well. It's not actually very long at the moment. What's my favourite video I've ever uploaded? Very difficult to answer. I don't think I have a single favourite, but there's a few. Just looking at the ones I've done this year, the one I did about my family trip to Sydney, I think that was a really fun one. I quite enjoyed doing that sort of more personal video, but also it's a bit more outside the box production wise, a little bit less conventional. I had a lot of fun with that. Actually, all the 3 Sydney videos I made earlier in the year, I had quite a lot of fun with all those as well. And particularly the ferry video, because that was sort of so different to what I'm normally used to doing. And if there's any of you that haven't watched the ferry video, please go and watch it, because I think it's a really good one. And it has had a lot less views than most of my other videos this year, which is not surprising, because this is a rail channel and anything without rails in it tends to get less views. But I think the ferry video was really fun. Has the success of my videos impacted my enjoyment of rail transit, and in what ways? No, I don't think it has. I think it easily could if I wasn't careful. I think I've actually enjoyed having an excuse to go out seeking more specific things that I need to photograph, or I need to sort of research or whatever. I quite enjoy having a goal when I go out taking photos. I think this might be a good example of how even if I spent 40 hours a week making these videos, 9 to 5 weekdays kind of thing, I don't think I could actually make videos much faster than I do now, because I think I'd get over it. I think it's because of the creative aspect of the production. It would be too draining, and I think that's when I would get a real burnout. So at the moment, it's very hard to say how many hours a week I do spend on them, but it's certainly not 40, and I think I've hit a pretty good balance of how much time I can spend on it while still enjoying it and while maintaining that creative energy. Alright, I'm just opening up some more general questions now, and I'm just figuring out how to even do that, because I'm using a Mac laptop. I am very much a PC person, but it's alright, I think I've got it figured out. Alright, what railway crossings do I think should have been included in the LXRP that haven't been? What are my thoughts on the LXRP closing crossings instead of grade separating? One really obvious crossing that I feel like probably should have been included is Station Street Fairfield, when they did Grange Road, which is only a few hundred metres away. I mean, I actually like Fairfield how it looks at the moment, so I don't know, I would personally like seeing that going down into a trench, but the fact that they dug this trench so close to it and didn't do Station Street Fairfield, which is a very busy crossing, does seem pretty surprising, and it seems like it would have been much better value to do those two at the same time rather than when they inevitably do it separately in the future. What I think about closing crossings permanently, which, to be clear, they have done in a few places, or they will do in a few places as well, and what typically happens is you end up with a pedestrian connection only. I'm basically supportive of that. I think most places it's a good way of reducing traffic often in sort of busy shopping strips and stuff like that. Cars can drive a few hundred meters to the next available crossing point while maintaining a good connection for pedestrians. I think it's obviously a case-by-case thing, but I think it's almost always a good idea. How efficient do I find Melbourne's public transport network for getting around, and are there specific things I think in need of improvement? So I have this kind of controversial opinion that Melbourne's public transport is pretty good, actually, and I've been strongly considering making a video about it, probably with that title. And we know that there are weaknesses, we know there are things we can do better, they're all very well documented. I will probably mention quite a few of them in this very video, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that we actually have a pretty good system. I think a lot of Melburnians get really caught up in this kind of self-deprecating thing of thinking that our public transport really sucks compared to other places, and they travel and they sort of see the best of what other places have to offer when they travel, and then they come home and they don't necessarily use the best parts of the system anyway, and they kind of think sort of like so many conversations I have with people where they just moan about public transport. And I know that's fairly universal. I think most people around the world think that their own public transport is bad, but it does seem to be very strong in Melbourne and Sydney actually. And I use the public transport network almost every day, often multiple times a day, a lot of trains, a lot of buses. The bus network is the weakest part of our transport system, especially the limited operating hours, limited frequencies, the poor connectivity with trains, things like that. That's a whole discussion for another time, but if you're travelling in Melbourne in the parts that are well served, the transport network is very good, and I actually find it to be pretty reliable. The number of times that I've actually been late to something because of a delayed or cancelled train is really small, and for the number of trains I catch, that's quite remarkable. At my previous job, I was commuting 3 days a week for nearly 5 years, and there was one time I was like 10 minutes late to work because my train was cancelled, and there was one other time pre-COVID that I couldn't get off the train and I missed my stop because it was so busy. Apart from those 2 times, there was a few times where, I got to work 2 minutes early instead of 8 minutes early or something like that. Like it's a pretty good system, and we're really lucky that we were set up with an excellent electric suburban railway system in the 1920s, essentially. And yes, you could argue there are many things that should have been improved in the 100 years since, but we have the bones of an extremely good system, and it could be improved. A lot of the improvements that are needed are more service related, that could be done on the existing infrastructure. So obviously advocacy is always important. It's always important to highlight the things that are wrong and how they could be done better, but I also think it's important to just step back every now and then and appreciate the good bits and consider ourselves actually very lucky compared to all sorts of places over the world, especially if you look at, similar sized cities in North America. We actually have a pretty good system. Berwick on the Pakenham line seems to have significant growth in use. Is it due to multi-level car park or the bus interchange? It's a good question. I don't go to Berwick very often. Really couldn't say why it has become busier than it used to be. I think it probably has got a lot to do with the fact that it seems to be a pretty major bus interchange, and obviously there's a fair bit of suburban growth out that way as well. But yeah, I don't have any specific idea on it. If anybody knows why that is the case, please do let us know. Do I think the new CAF CVT trains are an appropriate replacement for our long-distance XPTs and Explorers? I will reserve judgment until I get to ride on one, but for the Explorers, maybe. For the XPT, almost certainly not. I mean, obviously I covered this a fair bit in my XPT video recently. I think the XPTs, apart from being old, they're pretty good, and the sleeping cars are pretty good. And it'll be very disappointing to have a train that doesn't have sleeping cars. But yeah, as I say, I try not to make too much judgment on these things until I actually get to see them in person. You're an urban planner and have many opinions on Melbourne's train stations. From a land use and planning development standpoint, one of my top 3 and top bottom stations. Very good question. I always kind of find it hard to think of typical examples in these kind of cases, but one thing I will say is that I think a lot of the stations that sort of have good land use around them are not so much more recent ones that have been carefully designed to have good land use, but it's often the historical ones that were just built in a time when good pedestrian access was a priority. And so things like places like North Brighton, Kensington, even somewhere like Altona, where the station is it's right at the end of the shopping strip. You step out of the station and stroll straight up to the shops, whatever. Places like that where, yes, they have level crossings, yes, they're not super carefully designed, I guess, but the way they just sit in the suburb works really well. Montmorency is another one. Used to be slightly better, but it's still okay. In terms of the worst examples, I think it's places like Williams Landing, where it was a greenfield site. There was no real excuse to build it the way they did, but there's just like a huge car park being the closest thing to the station, and then the actual shops and stuff are a few hundred meters away, and it's really... Same with actually a lot of those Werribee Line stations. There's a lot of suburbia nearby, but if you want to walk from your house to the station, it's often really indirect, especially if you have to go over the freeway. So yeah, all that strip, sort of Williams Landing, Hoppers Crossing, and Laverton, all kind of examples of that sort of thing. Werribee itself is actually pretty good with the... it's got like a big pedestrian subway that leads underneath the road and straight up to the shopping strip at the side. Yeah, I think those are probably some of the ones that come to mind for me. What are my general thoughts on public transport systems of the Australian major cities? Yeah, I guess, first of all, I can't really make a judgment on Perth because I haven't been there yet. It's very embarrassing. I better fix that up soon. Melbourne and Sydney have both got very mature systems. You know, people have built their lives around the network because they've been there for so long, and you know, I mean, the reason why I live in the part of Melbourne that I do is because my grandparents bought land in Greensborough in the 50s, partly because it was near the station and they knew they could catch the electric train to the city. And certainly my whole life has been shaped around my position relative to the transport system. And so both, you know, Melbourne and Sydney have kind of got that going for them. Adelaide does as well. It obviously has some weaknesses in that from a limited service, and they've been very, very slow and inconsistent with their electrification. It would be really good to see them electrifying all of their suburban lines. Brisbane, I think, is a very good system. It's a little bit sort of limited in scope, but the infrastructure is very good. The stations all feel very, very nice. The trains are very nice. The trains are actually much more comfortable than trains in Melbourne. They've got like proper seats. I think the biggest weakness in Brisbane is the off-peak frequencies are quite bad. I think they're 30 minutes most of the time. I think if I had to say which one I think is best overall, it would actually have to be Sydney. You know, again, people are going to go, oh, the trains are unreliable or whatever. Yeah, whatever. They're pretty good most of the time. I think Sydney's emphasis on service much more so than Melbourne. Assuming the remaining work on the Metro Tunnel and line upgrades already approved by the government are complete, etc. What would I spend money on next if it were up to me? Would I fund the rest of the SRL, the airport link? Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'd probably go with the airport link. I think I'd go with the airport link. It's pretty important, and I think, you know, most of the planning work is done, and they've even done some preliminary works on it, so it would be definitely very good to see that actually happen. I'll talk a bit more about the SRL a little bit later on. Do I think Melbourne's current bus network is sufficient? No, it's not. I have been meaning to make a dedicated video about this. I think the bus network is Melbourne's weakness at the moment, and for the majority of the city, buses are the primary mode of public transport that's actually available to people, but it's often not available in the sense of having very limited service. So, you know, there's a bus route near me that doesn't operate on weekends, and there's lots of bus routes that finish at like 7 p.m, stuff like that, and have like ridiculously low frequencies, and yeah, it's really bad. And that is something that it is being talked about. You know, it's not like it's a problem people don't know about, but it's been pretty slow to have much action on it, and that's definitely one of the biggest improvements I think that we could see in Melbourne's transport in general. Where is the Melbourne public transport network at its best? I think, you know, if you live on a suburban railway line, and you know you can do a lot of your travel on the suburban network, it's like I sort of said before, it is very good. We have a pretty amazing system that's good at moving tons of people. If we were to say, like, you know, sort of a more specific example when it's at its best, you look at big sporting events at the MCG and things like that, where you have literally 100,000 people pouring out of this stadium, and they all get sucked up by the trains at Richmond, at Jolimont, and the tram lines on both sides and everything like that. And it is very impressive to see. And if anyone wants to know more about that, you should watch Philip Mellis's video about the Taylor Swift concert. At its worst is the connectivity between different services, like between trains and buses that just sort of theoretically should connect, but they just don't. Or, things like when there's bus replacements, which, as you'll know from my bus replacement video, are incredibly dysfunctional, and they still are. But you have situations where, like, the bus replacement doesn't necessarily match up with the train at the other end. And, like, I was in a situation back when I lived in Eltham, trying to get home to Eltham at night, and there was buses between, like, Heidelberg and Greensboro or something, and there was, like, a 50-minute connection between the bus and the train at Greensboro, which was about long enough that I could have walked to Eltham, but it was like 11:30 at night and I couldn't be bothered, so I just kind of wandered around aimlessly for 50 minutes. And that's sort of an iconically Melbourne experience that just has no real excuse for being like that. It just is for some reason. So yeah, in terms of things I've seen in other places that I'd like to see implemented in Melbourne, certainly like predictable connection times and like a real emphasis on how important that actually is to people. Do I have any plans to make more dedicated station junction explainer videos? Not quite in the same way that I did those other ones, because I've sort of covered all the big junctions, I guess, and that was sort of my main interest in doing those ones. I will incorporate sort of elements of that in other videos. As you've probably seen in many of my videos, I often explain the sort of junction areas within whatever it is I'm talking about. But I'm not so interested in making them about the smaller stations, just because I think it's more self-explanatory. I think my main interest in doing the like the Southern Cross one and the Richmond one was that that's a thing that people look at and you can't really easily work it out just by looking at it, and it's sort of a bit mysterious. So that was kind of my main reason for doing those ones. But I certainly wouldn't rule out doing it for some other places maybe, but mostly it'll be a smaller element in other videos. What's my opinion on land acquisition for rail projects? Yeah, obviously it's something you want to avoid when you can, but there are cases where it's sort of the only option, and I think as long as the people whose properties are being acquired are adequately compensated and treated well, then it's sort of just a fact of urban life that sometimes that's going to have to happen. Favourite song about trains? Favourite song to listen to whilst on a train? Intercity by Vion. It's this kind of electronic song that's which has a cool film clip set to 1980s promotional footage of HSTs in the UK. It's very cool. I will put that and anything else I mentioned in this video in the pinned comment down below if you'd like to check it out. What do I prefer, the green and grey interiors of the Alstom Commangers and X-Traps, or the yellow and white interiors of the EDI Commangers, Siemens and HCMTs? That is a good question, actually, not one I'd really thought about that much, but it's definitely the white and yellow for me. I think it just looks way better, it looks cleaner, and I suspect it's probably a lot better for people with low vision. I always thought the green handrails looked quite off-putting. It seems like a really strange choice to me. And it's kind of surprising that they've still stuck with it, like it's a Connex era thing and it's still around. Love your videos, very informative and entertaining. You were the source that sparked my interest in rails. Oh, that's really good to hear. I should just quickly say, lots of these comments have got some sort of complimentary message at the top like that. I don't have the time to respond to every single one of them, but thank you very much for all of your comments. It's been really good to see that this channel has definitely directly influenced some people being interested in the hobby in general like this, which is really fantastic. I think it's also influenced a few people to travel to various places and things like that. So yeah, like I sort of said earlier, well beyond the scope of what I expected when I started making these, but it is very exciting. Which train type announcement do I think is the best in the current fleet? The ones on the Siemens are very clear, just like the actual PA system is very clear. My main thought is that I just think it's a bit silly that they do differ between train types. I think that's something that's really important to be consistent, and it's not at the moment, which is silly. Were there any automated announcements for older trains like the Hitachi and the Blue Harris? There were not. So up until the mid-90s, we had guards on trains like Sydney and Brisbane do, and I assume the guards made manual announcements back then. I don't actually remember. But after the mid-90s, when they got rid of the guards, there was no announcements at all until the automatic announcements came in with the refurbished Commangers. in about 2000. Some drivers would make manual announcements, but it was actually pretty uncommon and almost always fairly inaudible. The Hitachis were running with no announcements into and no internal displays either into 2014, and it was probably 10% of drivers would make announcements on them. Most wouldn't. Just wondering what your favourite station is on the electric network. I don't think I have one favourite. There's a lot that I quite like. I quite like a lot of the old sort of large brick stations like Hawksburn and Heidelberg, stuff like that. One I've been to recently that I quite enjoy is Seaholme. It's kind of got this weird, quite unusual looking weatherboard building. It's on like a nice curve and there's date palms all around the station. It's a really nice place. If I had to compare every Melbourne-based AFL team to a train line, what team would be which line? I don't think I can really answer this because I don't know enough about footy, but what I do know is that AFL teams do kind of have like social and sort of political connections with the parts of the city that they originate in, and it would be hard not to just connect each Victorian team with the line that it's physically on, I would say. I know that the Western Bulldogs, being a sort of former working class team, probably not anymore, but from the inner west, where a lot of the railway yards and workshops and stuff are, there's a huge amount of support for the Bulldogs within the railways. And when the Bulldogs were in the grand final in 2016, there was a lot of trains with Bulldogs decorations on them and things like that. If anybody else would like to make a full list of answering this question, it would be very interesting to see. I know my dad would be very interested to see it, but I don't think it's something I don't know enough about footy, unfortunately. Hello, Stephen. Onward to 1 million, indeed. It might take a while, but we are on our way. What will the Metro network look like in 10 years' time? Very good question. I think there'll be even more grade separations. I think we'll see a lot more. Probably the other half of the upfield line will get the Skyrail treatment, and I think we will see a lot more infrastructure renewal. Obviously, the Metro Tunnel will be open. I'd like to hope that the Metro Tunnel 2 will be well underway by then. Who knows? Maybe I'll be getting my first Metro Tunnel 2 station tour invite by then. Might be pushing it for 10 years, but fingers crossed. Is the abandoned South Gippsland Railway reasonable for a comeback, and would I like to see a comeback? I would. The challenge with South Gippsland is that it's geographically challenging. It's very hilly and windy, and the way it was built means it winds around all the hills, so it's very hard to have a competitive running time on it. Having said that, running time is not the most important thing, and if you created a affordable, moderately frequent service down there, I think it would be good, and obviously it was good in the past, and I think as the population of the state grows, it's going to be very important to reconsider these things. Do I think quadruplication of the line between Caulfield and Dandenong would fix the congestion problems with V-line trains? Yes, it would. You probably wouldn't have to do the whole way, though. This has been something I've been meaning to look into the actual numbers of, but I suspect you could do a few strategic sections of quad track and maybe even a few strategic sections of triple track just to create effective places to overtake. It would be very interesting to work out what's the bare minimum infrastructure you could get away with allowing the V-line trains to overtake each suburban train and get a relatively clear run between Pakenham and the city. And this is only going to become more and more important as the Dandenong line gets busier with the Metro Tunnel opening. Have I ever considered a trip around Australia by train, such as Rory Ding did? Probably not in one go. I will, hopefully as my life continues, like to tick off more and more parts of the country, but I really can't afford to go on the Indian Pacific or the GAN. It would be a cool thing to do one day, but with the current price of travelling on them, I can't really see any situation where I would be able to afford to do that, unfortunately. Why are Melbourne's trams standard gauge but the rail network is broad gauge? So Victoria's rail network began in 1854 at a time when these things were sort of still being considered. Long story short, broad gauge was going to be the standard gauge of Australia. New South Wales actually agreed to that and then changed their minds. But by the time the tram network was being built about 30, 40 years later, the benefits of a standard gauge was much more acknowledged, and there was no real need for the tramway to be compatible with the railway, so it was better to just go with standard gauge there. And we did actually have one broad gauge tramway, the St Kilda to Brighton tramway, which was operated by the Victorian Railways. Do I think Melbourne has the capacity to overcome car dependency and embrace transit-oriented development? No would be my short answer. I think Melbourne is always going to be a place of extremes, like it is at the moment, where you've got places with good TOD, and you've got places where it's very easy to live car-free, and there's sort of good inner suburban neighbourhoods and things like that. But we are still building urban sprawl at an alarming rate, and we're still building it with very poor facilities, and the fact that we're still building it now is locking us into a very, very long future of that kind of development. But I would say I know plenty of people who live car-free in Melbourne, many of them actually in the outer suburbs. If you structure your life around the transport network, much as I have to some extent, I do drive a little bit, but I primarily use public transport, you can sort of avoid the worst of it as an individual. What place do I think electric cars have in our future? I think it's fairly inevitable that cars will be electric in the future, but I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of people look at the problem with cars and they think about carbon emissions, and then they don't think about anything else. So they think that electric cars are going to solve the problem with cars. But to me, carbon emissions, obviously it's very important that we reduce them, but it's almost the most boring reason why cars are bad. I'm much more interested in the fact that they are extremely dangerous and create really bad use of urban land, and very expensive for individuals to own and operate, and those things are not going to be changed by electric cars. Something that I've thought about a little bit being out and about with my kids is that there's only one sort of constant danger that I have to watch out with when I've got my kids with me out in public, and that's cars. Pretty much everything else, trains and trams and even buses behave in very predictable ways. It's very easy to be safe around them. Cars, you can be walking perfectly safely along a footpath and a car can still come and run you over. And we live in Australia. There are, deadly snakes and things like that, but that's something you can teach kids quite quickly to avoid, and the actual instance of running into them is very low. It's the one thing that is the possibility of death or serious injury every single day is cars, and it's not going to change with electric cars. Have I ever not paid outside the free tram zone? What would I change to the fare structure? I would tell you if I had, and I can honestly say probably once or twice when I was a teenager, but not much. A handful of times on the bus because nobody pays on the bus. But no, generally speaking, I consider public transport in Melbourne to be so cheap that there's not much point fare evading, and the anxiety of encountering ticket inspectors would be way too much for me. So no, I absolutely always pay. The only real significant change I would make to the fare structure is, as is fairly well established, it would be very good to have a better short trip fare for very short trips that makes it worthwhile for people that are making very short journeys. And it would be good to have the compatibility with paying with a credit or debit card, which I think is coming anyway. Do I think there will be a Comenge goodbye tour? It's definitely possible. There would be absolutely no guarantee that there would be, however. The Hitachi farewell tour was actually organised by the LACRAL volunteers. So any tour, don't expect Metro to organise a farewell tour. If there's going to be a farewell tour, it'll be organised by people on their own time. So, and would obviously depend on cooperation of Metro. So I wouldn't cross your fingers for it. And I also wouldn't cross your fingers for it to visit specific lines, because generally in a day tour you can only tick off about maybe 3 to 4 lines. But it'll be fun if they do. How was I so lucky to get invited into the metro tunnel? Okay, yeah, this is a really interesting question, and one I have been asked by quite a few people, and the real answer is that it's not really luck. So I can't vouch for the exact motivation for why I've been invited to certain things, but I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that I've been invited to things just because I'm an enthusiast, but it's more to do with the fact that I have a very large audience on the internet. So it's a mutually beneficial situation where it's free promotion for them, it's good for me, and there's also, in the particular case of the metro tunnel, there's a lot of very enthusiastic young people working on the media team there who are very friendly, and they're obviously familiar with my videos, and they reached out to me. So I have seen a few people, some of you will know exactly what I'm talking about here, making very public rants about this on various social media, saying that, oh, how come these special people are getting invited to things and I'm not? I'm an enthusiast and I didn't get invited. And the answer is it's you don't get invited because you're an enthusiast, you get invited because you have an audience. And the other thing is that I am easy to find. Because of the size of my audience, there's a lot of people who know who I am, and it's very easy to find my email address. I've seen this a bit with in the UK with people complaining about Jeff Marshall getting special treatment and getting invited to things. And particularly with Jeff, he doesn't get invited to things because he's an enthusiast. He gets invited because he's media. Essentially, he's media. He gets invited to media events. So, and it's his job. And, to some extent, this is my job as well. So I do feel very lucky to get invited to these things, but it's not really a coincidence. Would running the X-Tupolis on the Burnley group displace the older X-Traps to Frankston, etc.? It would have to, because the Burnley group is currently 100% X-Traps, so if you put anything new on it, it's going to displace other X-Traps to the other lines. I don't believe there is any plan to run them over there, but it probably will happen long term. Will I make a video about the Somerton rail link? It'd be a very interesting topic. Do I think it will be electrified and have trains run on it again? I sort of covered this briefly at the end of the Upfield line video. I probably won't make a specific video about it, but there is a long-term plan to extend or re-extend the Upfield line that way and electrify it as part of probably a Wallen extension. Describe your ideal slice of toast. I'm going to say blackberry jam. It's pretty yum. Your videos have become the highlight of my week. Oh, thank you. What is something that I love about another city's transport system that you would like to be implemented in Melbourne? I'm coming back around to buses again. It's good, well interconnected buses, definitely. Hello, Shareth. What's your dream Melbourne rail project, dream Melbourne tram project? So I'm not going to go practical here. I'm just going to go dream because I would like it. An extension of the Hurstbridge line to King Lake, which was definitely a possibility in the past. It would be very scenic and serve a very small number of very small communities, but I think it would be really cool. Dream tram project. Extend the 109 north through Doncaster all the way to Eltham, and extend the 48 to Doncaster while you're at it as well, just to be a bit radical. Do I think tourist railways can or should be used for regular passenger service? There would be very, very few situations where that would actually be practical. It's certainly something that I've thought about as a hypothetical, but very, very difficult to be competitive with a bus when your line speed is very low. I also think, and I could be wrong here, but I think there's actually some sort of legislation preventing tourist railways competing directly with public transport. But we can dream. Is it possible to compare public transport patronage to, say, 50 years ago? It certainly is. There is a blog post about it by Daniel Bowen, which I will link in the comment down below. And the TLDR is that patronage today over the whole network is slightly above what it was in the 50s. It sort of dropped after the 50s as car dependency became a real thing, and then sort of down towards the 80s, and then has slowly climbed up again. And the main difference now is that rail has a much bigger share than it used to. It used to be there used to be more people on trams and buses, but yeah, I'll link that down below if you'd like to look at the actual data. Should we reopen the Geelong to Ballarat line? I would like to consider that Geelong to Ballarat is a pretty good example of, because the line is already open, it exists, it's just for freight trains only, and it would not be particularly hard to reinstate some platforms with very basic facilities and run a train or two between Ballarat and Geelong. It could be like a single car sprint or a 2-car sprint or whatever, and that would be pretty cheap, and that's actually the sort of thing that would happen in a lot of other countries. So it's the sort of thing that we think is like impossible in Victoria with our attitude, but it wouldn't be very hard to do, and it would be sort of more accessible than the bus. There is a bus that does it already. I think it's definitely an idea worth considering, yeah. Do I think the railways are losing their character with every train looking similar and usually being quiet? Yes, a little bit, but I think history has sort of shown that people will always find something to be interested in the railways. I think at the end of steam, everyone thought the railways were going to be boring forever, and then that's sort of happened a few times since, and there's always new lots of people getting passionate about new trains, basically new operations. So yeah, as much as I sort of feel like the railways of my childhood are slowly changing and disappearing, I think there's still going to be plenty to be interested in the future. Is the Taitset my favourite set of New South Wales trains? Not really. I do like Taitsets, but I guess of the ones that are currently in service in the suburban area, they'd certainly be pretty high on my list. If I was given the job of duplicating the Hurstbridge line up to Eltham, how would I solve the Trestle Bridge question? Yeah, I don't know. I'd probably consider actually just rebuilding the whole thing in a similar style and double track. There used to be some double track wooden bridges like on the Frankston line, so you could sort of do it with still a pretty accurate VR look, and there aren't any parts of the current bridge that are actually original, so I think that would be plausible. However, I do think a really important thing to consider with the Hurstbridge line is that a lot of people get really caught up in the single track still being a problem and often apply it to situations where it really isn't a problem. So a lot of Eltham locals, a lot of Hurstbridge locals, a lot of Diamond Creek locals, they'll go down to the station, they see that the train's in 19 minutes or 39 minutes or whatever, and they go, this single track is terrible, we need to duplicate it. But that's a service problem, it's not an infrastructure problem. You can already run a 10-minute frequency to Eltham all day if you wanted to, and you can already run a 20-minute frequency all day to Hurstbridge if you wanted to. They just don't. So they do it briefly in the peak hour, so we know it's possible. But I don't really see that there'd be any need to duplicate Montmorency to Eltham anytime soon. You just fill in the gaps that already exist with more trains. With all the long distance routes becoming velocities, will the same thing happen to Swan Hill? It most certainly will. I think it might still be a little while, but yes, it's absolutely on the cards. What are the greatest flyovers and why is it Redfern Central? You have answered your own question there. It absolutely is. Should the Metro Tunnel be christened with a Hitachi? That would be fun, but yes, I think we know what the answer to that is. Do I think the Alamein line will ever be double tracked between Ashburton and Alamein? Probably not. Same sort of thing with Montmorency to Eltham. It's just not long enough to really be a problem. It's only a couple of minutes from Ashburton to Alamein. It's just not that much of an operational constraint. And you can also terminate trains at Ashburton, so worst case scenario, you just terminate a train there. Do I think there will ever be service station upgrades on the Stony Point line? It would be good to see, and the easiest thing you could do with the Stony Point line is just put a single crossing loop in the middle of it and double the number of trains, and that would be pretty easy to do, so it would be very nice to see that happen. I don't know if it will happen, but this is a very good question. Why does Platform 2 at Box Hill have signals at both ends despite only being an up track, even during disruptions? So you can actually terminate a train in Platform 2 at Box Hill. You can terminate a down train off the centre line there. I'll have to put a diagram on screen so people know what I'm talking about here. That signal at the end of the platform facing the down direction is a fixed signal. It's just permanently red, and it's purely for the purpose of accepting that down train into that platform. You can't actually pass it. It probably isn't done very often because you can also terminate in 3 and 4, so it probably just I imagine it's quite a rare move. Additionally, why does the up end of 2 and 3 have route indicators? They tell you whether you're going onto the center line or the up line. So you'll get a left-hand arrow for the up line and a right-hand arrow for the center line. Do I feel that V-Line is doing a better job than CountryLink? V-Line has a much stronger sort of medium distance service, I guess, with trains all day and much better frequency, that sort of thing. CountryLink has much more comfortable trains. It's probably important to mention that for both these things, what we're really talking about is the state government, because they're both government operators and they do what is specified by the government. Why do rail companies seem to have custom-built trains instead of there being standardised off the shelf? It's really because railways evolved in the 19th century to basically whatever standards people felt like designing them to. And there are lots and lots of reasons why designs need to be different, partly like different operating conditions, like if you've got sharp corners, steep grades, whatever. Loading gauge is probably the biggest one, which is the dimensions of the outside of the train, basically what you can fit past structures through tunnels, that sort of thing. That varies wildly around the world. And then you've got different voltages, different requirements for signalling, what sort of equipment needs to be mounted on the train, all sorts of things like that. So we are kind of getting more standardized trains around the world, but it's always those sort of historical things that come into play. A lot of people struggle to efficiently plan on P2V and Google Journey Planners. Do I have any advice? I'm probably a pretty bad person to ask for this because I actually don't really like using Journey Planners at all. The only time I use them is if I'm somewhere that I'm really unfamiliar with that's quite complicated, like if I'm somewhere like London and I need to travel a route that has multiple changes or something like that, I might ask the Journey Planner's advice, but I really like to actually look at the actual timetable and just look on maps at where I'm going, and I think it gives you a much better sort of context of what you're doing and what's around you. I'm probably a bit old-fashioned in that regard though. Do I approve of Melbourne's track gauge? Are there positive and negatives to it? There aren't really positives and negatives. It's just a compatibility thing. Like it's problematic that it's not compatible with the interstate system, but in terms of the difference between standard and broad gauge operationally, it's basically nothing. People occasionally talk about broad gauge being more stable and things, and if you really dig down into the numbers of it, it would be, but it's not actually a practical difference that humans can actually notice. The city loop reconfiguration, you're skeptical that it's easily marketable to voters. Yeah, I basically agree. I think it would be very good, and I think it's how the city loop should have been built originally. But they'd have to be very careful how they sold it to convince people of its value, I think. Are VSETs the peak Aussie train? Yes, they are. What do I think of your idea of Comenge trains being converted into battery-powered units to run to Melton and Wyndham Vale? This could be a massive extension to their lives. Not for those routes. Melton and Wyndham Vale are easily busy enough to justify proper overhead electrification. They should have had it years ago. They should definitely have it now. The only real situation anywhere in Victoria, I think, that could potentially justify battery trains would be the Stony Point line, where you can sort of, it's a very short line. You could sit and charge at each end of the line, and it's a bit of a it's an odd one out network wise, but even then, the most important thing is that you're getting people off the roads, and if you're doing that with a diesel train, that's still doing a good job. So for the moment, just leave it as a diesel rail car, it's fine. But yeah, Melton Wyndham Vale should definitely be properly electrified. What would I rather, eat an entire Hitachi set or eat 2 Hunter J sets? Yeah, I'm sure we've all asked ourselves this question at one point or another. So J sets, 2 cars each, so we're talking 2 of them. We're talking eating 4 cars there. Hitachi set, I'm going to assume you're saying a 6-car set. So we are talking just more material to get through there. The Hitachi is also a fair bit older and definitely contain a little bit of asbestos and probably some other stuff you wouldn't really want to eat. So I think I'd have to go with the Hunter sets. What is my favourite train ride I've taken in my entire life? Not something I can easily can't really think of any one trip that stands out above others. I've got quite a few trains around like the Swiss Alps and that sort of thing that it's pretty hard to beat any of them really, but I did over 2 days catch trains all the way through Austria from one end to the other, and all of that was pretty incredible. I don't think I can narrow it down to one specific journey. Any plans to join up with other transport YouTubers like Jeff or Reese? I certainly have at least one more video happening with Reese in the relatively near future. It might actually be quite soon after this comes out. I have not spoken to Jeff. If he ever felt like he wanted to do a video with me, that would be pretty cool, but he's not someone I've actually talked to at this stage. Would I ever consider doing a podcast? I suppose it's sort of another one of those things where I don't really have the resources to be branching out into other types of content. It's possible that some of my videos could work if they were released in audio-only format. Probably the closest thing I've done to that is the tram tier list I did with Philip recently. It is something that's crossed my mind, and it may well happen in the future, but it's not something I can really put the effort into at the moment. Should the Extrapolis trains get new dynamic passenger information screens similar to on the Comenge? Yes, absolutely. As I said earlier, I think it's very weird that we have different passenger information on different types of trains. It certainly shouldn't be the case. How often do I talk to people working in the railways for different things? Not that often. I do know a few people that work in the railways, not tons of them. Increasingly, I've sort of met more people through this channel, and I've also had a few people that I've known who have begun to work in the industry, but I don't really like to harass people for questions about their job when they're not working. There are, every now and then, if there's something I need clarified, I might ask someone, but most of the time, most of the information that I need can be found in enthusiast resources, basically, either on the internet or in one of the many books that I have available. Do I think it was dumb to remove tram conductors? Pretty much, yes. I get the whole economical thing, but I think the value to the sort of perceived safety of the system would have been much better with conductors. To be clear, I don't actually remember the time when there was tram conductors, but having travelled on other systems where there are staff on board, it certainly makes a big difference. And certainly things like, helping people with prams or shopping or whatever, things like that. It actually would have made the high floor trams a bit less of a problem when there was a staff member there that could easily help you out. What do I like more, Met cards or Mikey? I enjoyed Met cards because they were collectible, but Mikey's fine. I know people like to complain about it, but Mikey's fine. I don't mind it. Do I think they'll ever put back the Hillsville and Warburton lines? I've left this reply down the bottom from Tank 33 Hand 33 because I think it's basically the correct answer is they won't, though it would be great. Hillsville I would consider more likely than Warburton to be returned. Either one of them I think would be very good, and I actually think would be probably quite busy, easily as busy as some of the existing lines, but yeah, very, very hard to imagine it happening. Have I ever taken a bus to Leongatha? I don't think I've taken a bus to Leongatha. I have been on a bus through Leongatha. I've been on the Yarram bus one time. Have I taken a train to Traralgon for the night? I certainly have not. I have been through Traralgon on a train at night, but I have definitely not gone there for the night. Do I think that a modern locomotive hall design, like a Siemens Charger, Venture carriages, could be a good fit for V-Line's long-distance services? Probably, yeah. It couldn't be the exact same design because of loading gauge differences and stuff like that, but something in that similar vein is definitely a good idea. They're cars that are properly fitted out for long-distance travel, unlike what we are currently experiencing in Victoria. What is my opinion on the stainless steel aesthetic of many passenger trains in Australia and America? Yes, it is excellent. I love that stainless steel look. For those that don't know, or particularly for people familiar with American trains, that Budd stainless steel design with the corrugated stainless steel was licensed to Comenge in Australia. So Comenge built corrugated stainless steels under license from Budd, and it's a very iconic look of Australian rolling stock from the sort of the 70s, 80s and 90s, and yes, I think it looks great. Would I do like Melbourne Railway Videos has a top 10 metro stations? Probably not. Partly because lots of other people have already done it, namely Melbourne rally videos, as you've said. I'm not really into kind of top 10 list type things. I know lots of people are, and that's great, but it's not really the type of thing that I like to do. What is my least favourite part about making content? It would have to be moderating the comment section. So not all YouTubers bother moderating their comment sections because it's both very difficult and very depressing a lot of the time. My channel's sort of still of the size where I can still read all the comments, and I don't necessarily have time to reply to them all, but I do, generally speaking, except on particularly busy days, I can generally get through all the comments. And I do like to have some level of moderation because it's kind of important to me that the community around my videos is a sort of a fairly safe space, and I don't want basically nastiness spreading in the comments, which, as we all know, happens very easily on YouTube. I'm pretty heavy-handed with the ban button, and I've got a lot of blocked words set up and that sort of thing because it's remarkable the sorts of things that do come up. So yeah, when I'm going through the comments on any given day, it's usually overwhelmingly positive and interesting takes and that sort of thing, but there's always, every single day, there's always at least somebody who says something pretty awful or just really misleading or conspiratorial or, you know, a bit stupid, whatever, all those things. I do try and manage it. I will say the one thing that I don't see is replies to comments. The way that YouTube's sort of the back end of managing the comments works is I will see the first comment that comes up, but if people reply to that, unless I'm in that conversation, unless I've actually replied to it myself, I won't get any notification about it. So I should say, if you do see like unpleasantness in replies to comments, if you see something that you don't think should be there, you know, at me in a comment so that it actually sends me a notification, and I'll come and boot them out for you. And question about the suburban rail loop I will come back to. Do I think advertising should be on the metro network, more specifically the exterior of trains? I have a sort of slightly hypocritical view on advertising, where I sort of dislike a lot of advertising. I really don't like in-your-face advertising. But as an enthusiast and someone interested in history, and specifically as a photographer, I like to include advertisements in my photos wherever possible because I think it often captures the time and place a lot more than other scenes. You know, if you think about historic pictures from the 50s or the 60s, the stuff that often leaps out to you is like the cigarette advertising and, you know, the advertising the kitchenware to women, or, you know, really stuff that defines the sort of the social values of the time. And today it's things like phone plans and internet speeds and you know, ads for crypto, stuff like that. That's gonna, in the future, you'll see those ads and you go, wow, that's really interesting and of the time. So yeah, I don't really like advertising on trains, and it should absolutely not be on the windows, but I do enjoy the history that it creates visually. A couple of questions here about Adelaide. I am making an Adelaide video. It's one I've been telling people I've been making for a very long time, probably well over a year. The script for it is quite advanced, and it will probably happen maybe early next year at this rate. It's something that I really want to finish off because I think it'll be a good one. I don't know that I'll make any specific commentary at this point on how South Australia can fix their rail network, but there probably will be a few little bits and pieces included there. And going forward, I would absolutely like to include some more Adelaide content. A couple of questions about what cameras I use. I've used quite a lot of different cameras over the years, so when you look at my videos, particularly something like the Hurstbridge Line one, which has a lot of shots taken over the years, there's probably like 10 different cameras in that video. But primarily these days I use a GoPro 10 for most of my motion shots. Pretty much anything you see that's handheld or anything that's like moving and wide angle, that's shot on my GoPro 10. And then my still camera is a Canon 5D Mark III, which is in its 11th year of service this year. So it's getting on in years, but it is still a beautiful camera and never lets me down. I still really enjoy using digital SLR cameras, and it's despite the fact that most camera manufacturers are moving away from it now, it's something that I hope I can continue to use for quite some time yet. What do I think are the chances of the High Speed Rail Authority business case actually amounting to anything real? Yeah, I'm not optimistic about it. I think we've had so many false starts on this. As I've sort of said before, it's become a bit of a joke, particularly with Utopia making an actual joke out of it, very accurately and very well, I should say. I think it's often sort of pitched in the wrong way to people. I think people think of it as a replacement for the current rail service, which is, only moves a handful of people each day, but that's because of what it is. And actually it's a replacement for the air service, so which is the 5th busiest air route in the world. And one of the only ones, or possibly the only one in the top 10 that doesn't already have like a very competitive rail system as well. Yeah, I think people always focus on the population of Melbourne and Sydney being, not high enough to justify it, but it's actually, the population isn't actually the most important thing here. The most important thing is how many people make those trips. And certainly in Australia, like if you're in Europe, yeah, it's really dense, there's cities everywhere, but because of that, you've also got lots of different cities you might travel to. Whereas if you're in Melbourne or Sydney, there's a good chance you will travel to Melbourne or Sydney at some point during any given year. So there's a lot of people that travel between Melbourne and Sydney specifically, and that's why it's such a busy route. So yep, I think it's justified, but I do not think it's going to happen anytime soon. What rolling stock would I like to see used on an Aussie HSR line? I'm just going to go full Gunzel and say I want an original TGV in the original orange colour scheme. But yes, any of those suggestions that more sensible suggestions that you've left there would also be good. In like the 70s or 80s or whatever, Phil Belbin, the concept artist for Comeng, did some cool drawings of the VFT, as they were calling it, which was aesthetically designed to be an Australian high-speed train, and that looked really cool. Have I been to many cities outside Australia and New Zealand? Yeah, so I've been to the UK a couple of times, I've been to Switzerland a couple of times, I've been to the Netherlands, Germany, Czech Republic, I've been to Hong Kong, I've been to Austria, I'm definitely forgetting somewhere. I've been to Thailand for 9 hours while I was waiting for a flight. I've been to Bali very briefly, no trains there, very disappointing. Yeah, like obviously the experience in many of those places is that seeing that public transport can be done a lot more efficiently than the way we do it here, but there's also examples of the way that we do it better than other places. For instance, in the UK, the way their model for private operation is ridiculous. Like the tickets are so expensive and they have like competing operators over the same routes, and like it's just an absolute mess compared to in Australia, where we basically just have like franchised private operators operating the public system, and they don't actually have that much say in how it's run. Did I say France? I can't remember if I said France. I've been to France. Liechtenstein, travelled across the entire country by rail. Do I like living in Melbourne, Victoria? Are there any areas that I would suggest people move to as an American if you've started considering moving to Australia or New Zealand? Yeah, look, I did this call out for questions on the day of the US election, so I'm not surprised to be receiving a few questions like this. Look, yeah, Melbourne's a great place to live. There are bad bits and there are good bits, but I think compared to the United States, what we would consider to be the bad bits are nothing like as degraded as what you see in some US cities. Australia in general, I think we're not immune to a lot of the sort of systemic problems that the US has, but there are fundamental things that we do much better. We have much better healthcare. It's very, very rare to have to spend any money on any sort of hospital visit or anything like that here. Most doctor trips are free. Individual medical debt isn't really a thing here. And our elections are much more functional. We have compulsory voting, so you don't have the fight of just trying to get people to vote in the first place. And we have preferential voting, which sort of allows smaller parties to be able to hold the two big parties to account a bit more, and I think that's pretty important. But yeah, in general, of all the other places that I've been in the world, I've never really considered moving away from Melbourne. And this next question on a very similar topic, why do I continue to live in Melbourne despite having lived here? Yeah, I have lived here all my entire life. It's mostly inertia, because the area that I live in is where all my family and friends are, and that's probably the number one reason, but also a lot of the things that I sort of prioritize in my life work well here, in terms of access to places to go camping and adventuring in national parks. Victoria has a huge variety of natural places to visit, from deserts to mountains to beaches to forests. We've sort of got little pieces of it all here. And yeah, I sort of really enjoy the aspects of living in Melbourne, where I can get around a lot on foot and by public transport, and there's good parks and stuff everywhere. And yeah, I've honestly really never even begun to consider that I would ever live anywhere else. I have visited Wellington and explored its rail network. Would I ever come to Auckland? Yes, I have actually been to Auckland once. I was there in 2015, I was in there for a few days, but it was just before they stopped running the diesel suburban trains, and it was really fun. I actually wrote an article about it for the Linesider magazine. If I can remember which issue it was, I will put it on screen for you now. It will probably be quite hard to find a back issue. I would very much like to revisit Auckland. I probably won't make a video about it until I get the chance to revisit it. But with my having small kids at the moment, I don't expect I'll be travelling internationally for a little while yet. Have I been to China or Japan before? I have been to Hong Kong. I have not been to mainland China or Japan. Very impressed with Hong Kong MTR, obviously, but I would really like to visit Japan one day, but as per the previous answer, I don't think that will happen anytime soon. Have I ever taken a train in Canada? No, I have not been to Canada, or in fact any of North America, or in fact any America. I do find Canadian transport quite interesting. I would be quite interested to visit most Canadian cities. I would like to see the streetcars in Toronto, just because there's some pretty strong parallels with Melbourne's system, and I think it looks pretty interesting. Do I think Melton electrification will happen? I've actually got a few questions here about electrifying the interurban area. Yeah, look, I think Melton and Wyndham Vale basically should have been electrified already. They are a suburban service. They're running as a de facto suburban service, and with the sort of the frequency and the number of people they're moving, they should absolutely be electrified. But by extension of that, I would also argue that everything out to Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo, Seymour, Traralgon, again, should be electrified. This is another sort of thing that Victorians, we kind of have this obsession with the fact that, but it's only the suburban area that's electrified. Well, but, you look at so many other places in the world where if you had a sort of 120, 150 kilometre long line with a train every hour, you would absolutely be electrifying it. Obviously, New South Wales is an excellent example of this with their wonderful electric interurban system. And I'd probably argue that once you'd done that, it would be worth considering bi-mode trains for the long distance lines, and then, a third to a half of the journey or whatever could be done under the wires. Am I a model railroader? I'm an intermittent model railroader. I have built 4 or so different layouts over the years and then had to dismantle them when I've had to move house. Someone else is asking, will I put any new videos of my model railway? I certainly will as soon as I build another one, but I currently don't have one. All of my trains are currently in boxes, and I have made the very basic beginnings of a new layout, but it's still going to be a while off at this point. But yes, I absolutely will make a video about it when I get there. Very pleased to see people remembering my OpenTTD map. Yes, it is still going. It is even bigger than that last time I made a video about it. It's ridiculously huge. I probably will. Maybe I'll make another video about it at some point if people are interested. I'm not sure how much demand there is out there, but definitely something I'll consider. It's something I just do every now and then. I find it quite relaxing playing Transport Tycoon. Often if I'm I've got the computer in front of me and I'm trying to do something that's not really coming together, I'll often just open up Transport Tycoon and play for a bit. So yeah, it is something I do fairly often. What is my favourite and least favourite things about OpenTTD? I would say my favourite thing is the way the signalling works. It's pretty good. Like, it's not 100% accurate, but you can do some pretty complex stuff with it and have a lot of fun designing different junctions and things like that. Least favourite, I'd say, would be the way that the passengers work. Like, passengers, if a passenger train arrives, just all the passengers at the station get on and then they just all get off at the next passenger station. I think it would be way better if they had specific destinations they were going to, or at the very least, maybe something like mini metro where there's like different categories of stations and they want to go to a category of station, because the problem at the moment is if you have like a big city station, the train picks up tons of people, and then if it stops, makes like an outer suburban stop, then it dumps all the people from the city there and picks up a small number of suburban people, and then it makes the long run to the next city with hardly anybody on it. So yeah, that would be cool if they could find a way of fixing that. Having said that, my version is probably really outdated, so maybe somebody has already fixed it. Should the Airport Rail Link and possibly other projects like the City Loop reconfiguration and Melbourne electrification be prioritised over the SRL? And yeah, look, obviously a few other people have asked about the SRL as well. I know that the main criticism of the SRL is its very large cost. Realistically, I'm not an economist and I don't really want to criticise it just based on cost. And I think a lot of people are very quick to talk about the cost of it, yet we're also building two very major freeway projects in Melbourne at the moment, which are also very expensive, and no one seems to be really criticising those. So I think it's a little bit lopsided there. I do think that the SRL, however much of it gets built, will ultimately be very beneficial particularly along that eastern corridor, north-south. It will be really good, and people will build their lives around it, I guess, in terms of making choices about jobs and where to live and that sort of thing. And look, my thoughts on it are very similar to what lots of other people have already said. It doesn't make a lot of sense that it's essentially replacing nothing. It's not like it's already there's already a busy bus route, and it's not going to be finished for a long time, and there's no sort of interim solution for it. But yeah, it's not something I have a really strong opinion about. Somebody's asking, should it be on the alignment of the old outer circle? No, because there's not really any benefit to that. Like, it's got to be underground anyway. You couldn't put it at ground level on the outer circle alignment, because that would be a lot of new level crossings, and it would be way more controversial politically, and it's also like, it's a nice bike track at the moment. It would be politically just much easier for it to be underground, and then there's no reason for it to be on that alignment. What was the last metropolitan station I visited? I assume you mean the last one that I visited for the first time. So I haven't visited every station, like I haven't stepped off at every station, but I have travelled the length of every line. In fact, I had travelled the length of every line by the time I was 12 years old, and the last place I visited was Cranbourne. And what do I think of the current PTV railway map? Aesthetically, I quite like it. I don't think it's super functional. The way all the groups are one colour doesn't actually tell you much about the service pattern. It doesn't show stopping patterns and things like that, except when it sometimes does, like for V-Line and like the Altona Express section. But it's also, it would be hard to show a lot more of that information without adding way more colours to it as well, I think. Have I visited every single station on the network, as in set foot on every station? So no, I haven't. There are quite a lot that I've not set foot on, and this did get me thinking, and I think I've made a moderately accurate list of the stations I have not set foot on. To be clear, this doesn't mean I haven't been there. I've absolutely been through all of them on the train, and I've absolutely been on trains that have stopped there, and many of them I've been there, like, to the surrounding area by other means of transport as well. So this is very specifically, haven't stepped foot on the platform there. You'll notice there's quite a few southeastern stations there that I have not covered. So I've got a few questions here about the use of velocities on the long distance routes. And yeah, look, I've sort of mentioned this before. I mentioned it a bit in the V-line video, and I'm pretty much aligned here with what most people have publicly said about this. Is they're a perfectly fine train for short to medium distances. They are not a good long distance train. They just aren't. They're not fitted out for it properly. I think the people on those long distance routes deserve a greater rate of comfort for those sorts of journeys. The loss of the buffet is extremely annoying. The less comfortable seats are extremely annoying. Look, it's not to say that NSETs are the best long distance train in the world either. They were designed for that purpose, where the velocities just weren't. And it would be nice to have something new and it could just be a better long distance fit out of a velocity, similar to what they have on the Albury line. I think we could do better than that, but yeah, I think it's a bit disappointing that we've gone down this path, and now that we've done it, we're locked in for a long time because, you know, these are new trains. They've put a lot of money into them. We won't be seeing a change to this anytime soon. We should make it absolutely clear. People often blame V-line for this kind of things. Again, that's just a proxy for the government. These are state government things. V-line just does what the state government specifies for these types of things. And specifically, yeah, it was mentioned that some of the Warrnambool services that were previously a 5-car inset are only going to be a 3-car velocity. I'm yet to see rock hard evidence of that, but if that is the case, that will be very annoying, because having caught those trains a few times, they are often standing room only on the Geelong section, so it would be pretty ridiculous if they are just 3-car sets. Okay, I think we have made it to the end of the questions. That once again, I have no real concept of how long that took. I think it was quite a while, but for those of you who are still here, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we covered a bit of interesting stuff there. I just want to say, once again, a huge thanks to my patrons. As I mentioned earlier, having that support on Patreon was really the difference between me making it through this past year, making these videos, and not having to get another job, or not. So I really can't overstate how important that's been, and it's really provided a sort of security net to keep this channel going, and has really allowed me to put the time in to make these videos that I just wouldn't have had otherwise. If you would like to join them and help support the channel, jump onto my Patreon, and for $5 a month, or a little bit less or a little bit more, you can get early access to videos, you can get some behind the scenes content, updates on what I'm working on, I'll tell you which long line video I'm doing next, and you'll get your name in the credits, and it really does mean a lot to me, and it helps this whole channel remain viable, which is really important. I just want to quickly thank 3 other people who have helped make this channel viable over the last year. Firstly, my brother Kian Bennett, who does all of my recording for me. I'm sitting in his room right now with his equipment. He is a very competent sound engineer and has made a huge difference to how these voiceovers sound, and really streamlined the whole audio side of the process. I also want to thank my mate Alexander Jamison, who has accompanied me on a lot of trips out taking photos, and probably more importantly, spent a lot of time with me just chatting about rail stuff and speculating about things. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that I know about rail comes out of those discussions, and he's certainly helped with a lot of the research on a lot of the videos. And finally, my partner Jesse, who has been 100% supportive of this slightly crazy and slightly risky endeavor over the past year, and is also the first test audience for all of my videos, and he's very good at giving the feedback that I need before these things go public. So thank you to all of those people, and if you haven't hit subscribe already, please do so, and we'll see what number we can get to by this time next year. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed the footage that's gone along with this. Thank you all for your support, and I will see you next time. Thank you.
There's a soup.